Okay, so this morning we come, and this week we come to the last portion in the book of Bereshit, the portion VaYechi. And let me just say the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are, the last portion is VaYechi. In the Eitz Chaim, it starts on page 293, but let's just wait for Rita there to connect there. Okay, so the portion is VaYechi, 293 in the Eitz Chaim. It's chapter 48, verse 28 is where it begins. I want to start, though, just on 294, because I'd like to do a lot of the verses, and I even want to play a soundtrack for you when we get there of a couple of verses on 297. So something a little bit different today in Torah study is sharing my screen. So let's go to 294. The beginning of chapter 48. This is one of the of portions in the Torah which begin with the impending death of the person being talked about, but using the word for life instead of death. So way back when, earlier in Bereshit, we had the portion Chaye Sarah, meaning the life of Sarah, and it talked about her death. It told us she's 127 years old when she died in Kiryat Arba. So here we're told that Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and he was 147 years old here in the last stages of his life. So he's not dead yet, but he will die later in the portion. So it's just interesting that the Torah portion decides to focus on life as opposed to the word death when talking about the death. So here we are, chapter 48, verse 1, 294. VaYehi acharei hadvarim ha'ela. And it came to be after these things, or as the English translation puts it more succinctly, sometime afterward. Vayomer leYosef, and he said to Joseph. Who said to Joseph? But it says in the English translation, Joseph was told. So somebody told Joseph, Hine avicha choleh. Behold, your father is sick. Now, apparently, if we look at the commentary below, that we find that below the line, Joseph was told, your father is ill. I don't want to. So let's not read it yet. There's something in there that said that this is the first time in the Torah that we're told that somebody is sick. We're told when Isaac wants to give the blessing to Esau that his eyes were dimming, but we weren't told that he's sick. We're told that people in the Torah are old and they recognize that their life is coming to an end, but we're not told that they're sick. So this is the first time that we're told that somebody is sick. So choleh, it's an unusual, usually there's a letter vav there after the letter chet. For choleh, here it's just the dot, the O sound dot between the chet and the lamed, which could mean, if there weren't vowels here, hine avicha chala, which could mean your father got sick. But the tradition is to read it, choleh is sick. Behold, your father is sick. Vayikach et shnei vanav imo. So Joseph brought his two sons with him, et Menashe ve'et Ephraim, Menashe and Ephraim. Vayaged leYaakov, and it was told to Jacob, Vayomer, and it was said, Hine bincha Yosef ba'elecha. Behold, your son Joseph has come to you. Vayitchazek Yisrael. Yisrael got stronger. So Jacob and Israel, the names are interchangeable here. Jacob, or it says in the English here, summoned his strength. He got stronger. Vayeshev al hamita, and he sat up in bed. So, a couple things to say here, and there's also another note below the line that when we go to visit somebody, we shouldn't just walk right in. We should announce our presence when visiting. So I do this often, with COVID. I haven't visited too many people just, because of COVID restrictions and fearful of potential spreading of virus or whatever with a sick person. But whenever I go and visit somebody, whether it's in a hospital or in a nursing home, I never call first to say I'm coming, but I always knock on the door and wait to hear permission, as opposed to doctors and nurses who might just walk right in. Depending on the hospital, depending on the place, sometimes doctors and nurses feel like they have free reign with the patient, and the patient's sense of privacy and control over their situation is really limited, so that you don't really feel like you're in charge, and you don't always feel respected when you are a patient in the hospital or in a nursing home. So by knocking on the door and waiting for permission to walk in, doctor, nurse, or any visitor gives back that sense of control. And so that's what the commentaries are suggesting by Joseph announcing, or having the courtiers announce his presence, so that Jacob can prepare himself and strengthen himself and sit up in bed. Because also, sometimes the patient wants to look presentable. And if you're in a hospital, you don't always look presentable. If you're in a nursing home, and that happens to be a semi-permanent residence, maybe you are presentable. But this way, you have a chance to prepare yourself, and it wouldn't be a bad idea if one wants to visit somebody in a nursing home or in a rehab facility to call first, to give the person a chance, the patient a chance to look presentable in however they want to do it. So that's some of that. Is there is a whole series of regulations. I wouldn't regulations, or kind of a broad outline of how to visit the sick. So visiting the sick, Bikur Cholim. My mind was escaping me for the Hebrew term. Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, is a basic mitzvah that we do. And in the Shulchan Aruch, which is the essential foundation of a collection of Jewish law edited 500 years ago, which has both Ashkenazi and Sephardi traditions combined, which makes it like the accepted summary of Jewish law. There is a section on Bikur Cholim, and the most common time, at least in the Shulchan Aruch, to visit the sick would be right after shul on Shabbat morning. So after shul, people would know who wasn't in shul, and then they would go and visit the sick right after shul before going home to lunch. So it's just interesting how in the Shulchan Aruch you get a sense of the description of Jewish law, and then secondarily, you kind of have a sense of what the customs were at the time 500 years ago. So the custom was to visit the sick on Shabbat after shul. But there in that section, there's a list of how we are supposed to present ourselves to the sick person, and what we are supposed to say, etc., to kind of lift the spirits of the sick. So here, Jacob is preparing himself, getting up in bed in order to do that. Now, there's another comment below the line that I'd like to look at, which I avoided before. Joseph was told, your father is ill. Was Joseph too busy with his responsibilities to be aware of his father's failing health? Right, so that's the question. Why did somebody have to tell Joseph that his father is ill? How come he didn't know? How come he wasn't in daily or regular contact with his father to know that his father had gotten ill? Or was he too busy? Or was he still ambivalent about his feelings toward his father? Maybe he's still, after 17 years of not seeing him, perhaps it was still, why hadn't his father, why did his father, he didn't know how his brothers had informed his father about Joseph gone missing. He didn't know about the coat of his striped coat being dipped in blood and Jacob being told that he is dead. But so all Joseph knows is he's sold into captivity. So he expects his father to come looking for him, and his father didn't. So maybe there's still ambivalence there. Or, as a midrash suggests, was he avoiding his father so that Jacob would not ask him how he came to be in Egypt in the first place? Maybe he just didn't want to tell Jacob the story about his brothers and what his brothers did, just to protect his brothers. The Talmud notes that Jacob is the first person in the Bible to be described as ill. Previously, the sages imagined people simply grew older and one day died. They pictured Jacob praying for a sign about the number of his days so that he would have time to bless his children and grandchildren, reflect on the lessons of his life, and articulate his hopes and wishes for his family's future. So there is a lot of midrash, not just about Jacob, but about Abraham and Isaac as well, that they are semi-prophetic, that they, in capability, that in other words, they had the talent to be able to see into the future. And there's midrash here about Jacob asking God for permission to give him a few more days to be able to share his last will and testament with his children and grandchildren. Okay, so Jacob steels himself and sits on the bed. Verse 3. VaYomer Yaakov el Yosef. And verse 2, by the way, below the line is that comment about how to approach visiting somebody in the hospital or a nursing home. Okay, verse 3. VaYomer Yaakov el Yosef. Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai nir'a elai beluz be'eretz Canaan vayevarech oti. It's interesting. So El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. So a couple things here. We're told earlier in the Torah, in the portion VaYechi, we're told that Jacob ended up in Luz, what is now Bethel. So the Torah tells us that the town was called Luz before, but it then became known as Bethel. And we're told that a couple of times. But I guess Jacob refers to the place as Luz and not Bethel. That's one thing. And God is referred to as El Shaddai. Whereas Joseph says to Pharaoh, Elohim is the one who has given me the talent to be able to interpret dreams. So it's just fascinating, the names of God. And why does Jacob refer to God as El Shaddai here? Why does Joseph refer to God as Elohim? What is the difference between them? It's really unclear. We don't know exactly what El Shaddai means. Shaddai, let me write this out, and so that we can understand better. If we write Shaddai, yeah, Shaddai is written this way, Shin Daled Yud, right? So when we put a mezuzah on our door, the mezuzah case almost always has a shin on it, if not Shin Daled Yud. And because it's on the door, and so this is the name of God we refer to, El Shaddai. Shaddai is an abbreviation for three Hebrew words, Shomer Daltot Yisrael, the guardian of the doors of Israel. So some people think there is this rabbinic tradition. Why is that name of God on the mezuzah? Because it's on the doorpost, and the idea is that we're asking for God to protect our doors. You know, clearly the understanding from the Torah of putting a mezuzah on our doorpost is, and it's the paragraph it's the Shema and V'ahavta paragraph that's written on a parchment that goes inside the door, inside the case. That is to remind us of the laws of the Torah. So it's a sign that this is a Jewish house. So that it's simply put, that's the reason why we have a mezuzah on our door, and we call it a mezuzah. Mezuzah technically means doorpost. So by saying we have a mezuzah on the door, we're really saying we have a doorpost on the doorpost. But the case is called a mezuzah, just the way it is. So what makes it kosher is the parchment inside of it, and the name of God associated with it is Shaddai, because of the abbreviation then that the rabbis derived. It stands for the guardian of doorposts of Israel. There is a tradition, some people touch the mezuzah and kiss it every time they walk in or walk out of a room that has the mezuzah, kind of reflecting this idea of where we recognize the mezuzah's there. We are spiritually in the moment to understand that why the mezuzah is there, and we're also asking for God's protection. All of that to say that the comment below here, above the line for El Shaddai, see comment to 17:1. If we go to 17:1, where we come across, yes, that God actually says to Abraham in chapter 17, verse 1, I am El Shaddai. Okay, so what the meaning of this name of God remains unknown is the commentary. So yes, so we don't know. We don't know what Shaddai means. We don't know the derivation of it, scholars are saying. So anything that scholars might suggest is a guess. If I look up in, there's a biblical Hebrew dictionary that I have on my shelf. This biblical Hebrew dictionary, BDB, which is Brown Driver Briggs. It's a classic biblical Hebrew dictionary. If I look up Shaddai, which I am doing right now, let's see what they say for it. So it's not here. That is interesting. Now the question is, how do I look it up? Unless it's El Shaddai, I can try that, but that's I'm not sure that will work. El is here. Just a second. It's God. Okay, just a second. There's a long entry for El, meaning God, and I'm just looking to see if El Shaddai is in that one. El Amet, El Rachum, El Kana. Huh. Oh. Okay, so it says Si Shaddai. So now I'm trying to, oh, it's the letter Sin. That's why they have two entries. That's what I was confused about. So this dictionary has entries for the letter Sin and then entries for the letter Shin. Usually that's not done. So now I can go to Shaddai. There it is. Almighty. So he translates it as Almighty. My sovereign Lord. El Shaddai would be my sovereign Lord. That's how that's how they suggest translating it. And this dictionary, by the way, what's the original year of publication? This is the new one. This is a 1979 edition, but it's not from 1979. It is, right, there's a whole preface here, 1906. So it's 115 years old. Okay, Almighty Lord. But again, scholars today suggest that that's not necessarily what Shaddai means. Could it be related to Shade, which is demon? That would be weird. The god of the demons or supernatural kind of powers, whatever it is. The point is that it's unusual. No, it's not unusual. It's just that God introduced God's self to Abraham in chapter 17 as El Shaddai. And every now and then, God is referred to as El Shaddai, but mostly God is referred to by the narrator of the Torah as either Adonai, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, or Elohim. So when we do El Shaddai, that's a little bit different, and we have to just take note. So God appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. Jacob says, Vayomer Eli, verse 4, and said to me, Hineni mafracha v'hir biticha. Behold, I will make you fertile and increase you. Unetaticha likahal amim, and make you a community of people, that make you into a nation. Venatati et haaretz hazot, and I'll give you this land, lezaracha acharecha, to your descendants after you, as achuzat olam, an eternal possession. Ve'ata, and now, so that's one thing that God said to me, Jacob said to Joseph, right? So, but now I'm in Egypt, right? But this land is the land of Canaan. Ve'ata shnei vanecha, and now your two children, Jacob continues, hanoladim lacha be'eretz Mitzrayim, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, ad bo'i elecha, before I came to you, Mitzrayima, to Egypt, lihem, they are mine. I consider your boys as my boys. Ephraim and Menashe, Kir Uvain v'Shimon yihiyu li. Ephraim and Manasseh, your Joseph's sons, will be like Reuben and Shimon to me. Reuben and Shimon are Jacob's first two boys, right? The first two boys born of Leah were Reuben and Shimon. Umoladetecha, and your birthplace, asher holadeta acharei, no, not your birthplace, your progeny, asher holadeta achareihem, that were born to you after them, lecha yihiyu, al shem achehem, they'll be yours, yikaru benachalatam, they'll be recorded instead of their brothers in their inheritance. V'ani bevo'i mi Padan, and I, when I came from Padan, right, the home country where I went to marry Rachel and Leah, Meta alai Rachel. So when I came to Canaan from Padan, Rachel died. Be'eretz Canaan baderech, in the land of Canaan on the way. Be'od kivrat eretz lavo Ephrata, while I was journeying in the land of Canaan, when still some distance short of Ephrat. Ve'ekbereh Hasham b'derech Ephrat, and I buried her there on the road to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem, which is now Bethlehem. So there's a comment below the line about these sentences, because it's kind of unusual. Why is he bringing up that? It's one thing to bring up the promise of God to him, saying that he's going to be a father of a great nation and they're going to inherit the land of Israel. And here they are in Egypt. So it's a promise that someday they're going to get back to Israel to inherit it. But what's this about Rachel dying? Why is he bringing that up? So below the line on the bottom of 294 on the right, Jacob on his deathbed remembers two incidents from his long and full life. When he was young, God appeared to him and told him that he would become a special person. And Rachel, the woman he loved, died young. Ramban and Ibn Ezra, so two rabbis from the early Middle Ages in Spain, Nachmanides, that's Ramban, and Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra is from around 1100 CE and Ramban around 1300 CE, again in Spain. Understand the reference to Rachel's burial on the road to Ephrat as an apology to Joseph for not having buried his mother in the family crypt at Machpelah, right? Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah and Leah are buried in the cave of Machpelah, and Rachel is not buried there. So perhaps, why is he bringing it up here? Perhaps he's saying sorry for not burying her there. Jacob fears, the commentary goes on, that Joseph, resenting the treatment of his mother, will not honor his own request to be buried in Machpelah, which is coming up, that he's asking Joseph, please make sure I get buried back there. Sforno, rabbi from Italy, a couple hundred years after this, like the 1400s, 1500s, imagines Jacob pleading that he was too overcome with grief to make proper burial arrangements for Rachel, whom he loves so desperately, and stating that he has felt guilty about it ever since. Okay, so rabbis understand perhaps some psychology that's going on here, that Jacob, talking to Joseph, the son of Rachel, his beloved wife, perhaps as an opportunity for him to say sorry for not burying her better. So it goes on, and we're back to verse 8. Vayar Yisrael et bnei Yosef. Israel, Jacob sees the sons of Joseph. Vayomer mi'ela, and he says, who are these? So he just talked about Ephraim and Manasseh, and now he sees these boys standing in front of him. Who are these people? So now, so below the line, who are these? Jacob, who has just spoken so extravagantly about his closeness to Ephraim and Manasseh does not recognize them? Has his vision begun to fail, as happened to his father Isaac in similar circumstances? Or did he fail to recognize Ephraim and Manasseh because, having been born and raised in Egypt, they were indistinguishable from Egyptian youths? In other words, they were dressing like Egyptian teenagers. They weren't dressing like Hebrew teenagers. So that could be just a commentary on just how kids dress today and how the older generation just doesn't like how kids are dressed. Perhaps that commentary is suggesting that. But so how do Ephraim and Manasseh prove themselves and their identity to their grandfather? Tradition has it that they reassured him by reciting the Shema. Hear, O Israel, literally. Hear, O Israel, Jacob, that is. We may look like Egyptians, but we affirm the same God as our father and grandfather. So it's just interesting, because the verse says that Jacob said, "Who are these?" It makes it appropriate for the commentators to try to explain why he'd be asking that question. 9. Vayomer Yosef el Aviv, Joseph said to his father, Banaihem, they are my sons. Asher natan li Elohim bazeh, whom God has given me here. So Joseph is referring to God as Elohim. Jacob refers to God as El Shaddai. Just interesting. I don't have more to say about that, except it's just interesting that the names of God are interchangeable here. Does the name of God is referred to one's comfort level with how one was brought up in understanding God, and this is the name that Jacob was more comfortable with, and this is the name that Joseph was more comfortable with? Or does the name of God reflect a different temperament, right? And that there is that idea in rabbinic literature that we call on God, Yud He Vav He, for mercy, and we call on Elohim for justice. And there are other names of God for different attributes. So is that reflected here? Elohim versus El Shaddai? Don't know. It's just interesting. Vayomar, and God said, Kachem na elai, Jacob said, Kachem na elai va'avarachem. Bring them to me so that I can bless them. Verse 10, Ve'enei Yisrael kavdu mizoken. The eyes of Jacob, Israel, got heavy from old age. Lo yuchal lirot, he wasn't able to see well. Vayagesh otam elav, and he brought them to him. Vayishak lahem, and he kissed them. Vayachabek lahem, and he embraced them. Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, Israel said to Joseph, Re'o fanecha lo filalti. I never expected to see you again. Vehine her'a oti Elohim gam et zarecha. And behold, God. So now he says Elohim here instead of El Shaddai. Jacob does. Elohim has shown, not only has shown you to me, but also your children to me. I never expected to see you again, but thank God I've been able to see you and your children. How wonderful that is. Verse 12, Vayotze Yosef otam me'im birkav. Joseph took them or brought them out from his knees. So I'm not sure exactly how they were situated and how this logistically worked out. Vayishtachu la'apav arza, and they prostrated themselves to the ground, or they bowed low to the ground, but it's prostrating. So bowing is from a standing position. Prostrating is from an on the ground position. It's like what we do on Yom Kippur during the Avodah service, when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest in Jerusalem, would lie prostrate, and all the people of Israel would lie prostrate too. The Kohen would say God's name, the Yud He Vav He, and everybody would respond, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. So that's it's prostrating as opposed to bowing. 13, Vayikach Yosef et Shnehem, Joseph took the two of them, et Ephraim bimino, mismol Yisrael, he took Ephraim in his right hand and put him to the left of Jacob, vet Menashe bismolo miyamin Yisrael, and he took Menashe with his left hand to the right hand of Jacob, right? Because Menashe is the older one. And so the older one should go under Jacob's right hand. Vayagesh elav, and he brought them to him. 14, Vayishlach Yisrael et Yamino, Jacob took his right hand, Vayashet al Rosh Ephraim, and he put it on the head of Ephraim, who Vahut Sa'ir, and he's the younger one. So he put his right hand on Ephraim, who was on his left, and then the Et Smolo al Rosh Menashe, and his left hand he put on Menashe's head. Sikel et Yadav, he crossed his hands. Ki Menashe habachor, because Menashe was the older one, but he put his right hand on Ephraim's head. So instead of having his hands like this, the way Joseph had put them, in the right order, right hand on older one, left hand on younger one, Jacob crossed his hands like this. Okay? And to continue the process of younger one taking over for the older one, right? Isaac was younger than Ishmael, and Isaac becomes the one to inherit from Abraham and Sarah. And then, of course, Jacob is younger by seconds than Esau, but he gets the birthright. And then, of course, Joseph, the second youngest, being the more favored one, and now Ephraim being the younger one, being the more favored one too. 15, Vayavarech et Yosef Vayomar. So he has his hands on Ephraim and Menashe, and now he blesses Joseph by saying, Ha-Elohim asher hitalchu avotai lefanav, God who caused my ancestors, my fathers, to walk before him, that is Abraham and Isaac, Ha-Elohim haro'eh oti, the God who shepherded me, me'odi ad hayom hazeh, from the day I was born until this day. 16, Hamalach hagoel oti mikol ra, the angel who redeems me from all evil, Yevarech et hane'arim, should bless. This God who has done all these things, caused Abraham and Isaac to walk before him, shepherded me from my birth until now, caused an angel to redeem me from all evil, that God should bless these boys, right? He's blessing Joseph by saying, bless these boys, V'yikarei bahem shemi, my name should be associated with them, or they should associate my name with them. The Shem Avotai, and also the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, Vayidgu ve'yidgu larov bekerev haaretz, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth. This is a beautiful prayer, a beautiful blessing that Jacob gives to Joseph by blessing Joseph's children. So it's not a direct blessing of Joseph himself, but it's a blessing of Joseph through Joseph's children. Now, there is a tradition to say the Shema before we go to sleep. Not just the Shema in the evening service, but the Shema even later before we go to bed. So I never got in the habit of reciting that, but if you look in a traditional Siddur, even in our conservative movement, Sim Shalom, there is a section for reciting the Shema before going to bed. Let me just pull the Siddur off my shelf. So the section is called Kriyat Shema al Hamitah, the reciting of the Shema bedtime. And I just want to see just a second if I can just find it in the Siddur quickly. So, oh, there it is. Prayer before sleep, 168. Okay, so it's 168 looks like this. A lot of Hebrew on it. And then 169. So it's 2 pages. And in this page is this paragraph, which starts Hamalach Hagoel Oti. So if you have the Sim Shalom weekday edition, it's there 168, 169. So what you say before you go to bed is a prayer, please protect me from going to sleep. Sleep for the rabbis is a mini form of death. We lose control over ourselves when we go to sleep, and we don't know if we'll wake up in the morning. So it's a prayer to please, God, protect me tonight. It has the Shema and the V'ahavta paragraph, has the Hashkivenu paragraph, which is from the evening service as well, and some of it, the prayer that comes after that. And then a section of verses from the Bible that recall God's blessings and protection. And this one, Hamalach Hagoel Oti Mikol Ra. So this verse here, verse 16, it becomes part of the liturgy for the Shema for going to bed at night. Now, I also wanted to share, there's a beautiful tune for this. So again, this is no disparaging comment on my parents who are here and should live and be well. But different families have different traditions and different, depending on which denomination of Judaism you are raised in, you have different traditions about what you're brought up with. So I was never brought up with saying the Shema before going to bed, and going to Jewish day school. I don't recall ever hearing about it. I only learned this from Camp Ramah later as a counselor. It's a tune that's also recited as part of the Shabbat afternoon Seudah Shlishit, the third meal of Shabbat between Mincha and Havdalah on Shabbat afternoon. There are songs associated with each meal of Shabbat, Friday night, Shabbat lunch, and also Shabbat. I'm just muting you. What did you want to say, Mom? You have to unmute yourself because I muted you. Unmute yourself.
I'm muted.
Yes, yeah, go ahead. What did you want to say?
Okay, I just wanted to say that I did do the Shema with your children.
Yes.
I would babysit them and put them to bed. That's all.
Yes, right. So Lenore and I always said the Shema with our kids, and but it's just the Shema V'ahavta as part of the going to bed routine that we would do with the children. It wasn't these 2 pages that we did with our kids. So of course, if we were away and my parents were watching the kids, they would do that too. But the tune for this Hamalach Hagoel Oti is a tune, is one of those songs of the meal of the Seudah Shlishit. So Friday night has its songs associated with it. Shabbat lunch has its songs associated with it, and Shabbat afternoon has its songs too. So I want to share my screen and play you this brief, beautiful tune. So let me just do this. There we go.
המלאך הגואל אותי מכל רע, יברך את הנערים ויקרא בהם שם
Okay, I just like that tune, and I learned it at Camp Ramah, and when we come across it always in this weekly Torah portion, I always think about that. So there just, and I shared it with you just because there are associations of verses in liturgy, and that understanding that this prayer, this blessing that Jacob gives to Joseph is not a one-shot blessing, that it's understood as a perpetual blessing that we give to our children from one generation to the next. And so that often, no, not often, always, the Torah is understood that way by the rabbis. So something that looks like was done 3,000 years ago becomes something that continues to happen from one parent to child, and to every parent to every child in every generation. So that's how the rabbis understand Torah and understand these prayers. So that this beautiful prayer, which in our English translation you see that it's just how the English is written, that it's in more poetic form. Clearly, what Jacob is saying here is poetry as opposed to regular prose, and the English translation marks that and how it arranges the words. So, and then, so if we go on just a little bit, Vayar Yosef, verse 17, Vayar Yosef ki yashit aviv yad yamino al rosh Ephraim, that when Joseph saw that his father had put his right hand on Ephraim's head, Vayeram be'enav, he didn't like it. He thought it was wrong. Vayitmoch yad aviv lahasir otah. So he grabbed his right hand to try to move it. Me'al rosh Ephraim, from the head of Ephraim, al rosh Menashe, to put it onto Menashe's head. Take it away from Ephraim's head and put it onto Menashe's head. Vayomer Yosef el Aviv. Joseph says to his father, Lo chen avi. It's not right, Dad. Ki zeh habachor, because this one is the older one. Sim yamincha al rosho. Put your right hand on his head. Right? Maybe Joseph is so adamant and physical about this because he knew what happened to him as being the favored younger one over all his older brothers, and what resulted with that because of his treatment. And he didn't want anything like that to happen to his sons. He didn't want Jacob to be perpetuating this perhaps future mistreatment of the younger child because of his favored status. So 19, Vayima'en Aviv, and his father refused, that is to move his arm. Vayomer Yadati Vini Yadati, and he said, I know, my son, I know. Gam hu yeh la'am. Don't worry, he'll also be a nation. V'gam hu yigdal, he'll also grow up. V'ulam achiv hakaton yigdal mimenu, but however, his younger brother will be greater than him. V'zar'o yiyeh melo hagoyim, and his descendants will fill up all the nations. And, so this raises the question, is this prophecy? Certainly the rabbis understand this as prophecy, or is this written after the fact? Because the northern king, so after King David was King Solomon. King Solomon built a temple in Jerusalem. After Solomon, two of his sons vied for the kingship, and it was not settled. David's sons also vied for the kingship until David said explicitly, Solomon is the one who's going to take over. Solomon did not say who's going to take over after him. So there were two sons who vied for the title, and one of them decided to set up an alternative throne in northern Israel in the town of Shomron. So you had one son who's in Jerusalem, and the other son is in northern kingdom of Israel, at what essentially becomes the northern kingdom of Israel in Shomron. And not only does he set up a throne there, he builds an alternative temple there. So that sets the groundwork. The northern kingdom of Israel then, under that son of Solomon, have kings for the next 200 years. And then that northern kingdom gets exiled by the Assyrians. The northern kingdom, instead of just being called the northern kingdom, is called Ephraim, after Joseph's son. And then the southern kingdom of Israel, based in Jerusalem, is called Judah. Northern kingdom of Israel goes the way of the world and assimilates into the Assyrian Empire, gone for good. Southern kingdom of Israel, Judah, is the only one that remains. So we're called Jews, and it's Judaism because the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah, is the only tribe besides Levi. Anybody who's a Kohen or a Levi is from the tribe of Levi. So Levi and Judah are the only two tribes left out of the 12 tribes of Israel. So is this prophecy from Jacob in verse 19 that Ephraim is going to be greater than his brother and will be it'll be plentiful enough for nations? Is it prophecy, or is this written after the fact? We don't know. Verse 20, Vayevarachem bayomahu, and he blessed them on that day, lemor, saying, B'cha yivarech Yisrael lemor. In you will Israel bless, saying, Yesimcha Elohim, may God make you ke Ephraim v'chim Nashe, like Ephraim and Menashe, Vayasem and Ephraim lifnei Menashe, and he made Ephraim before Menashe. Now that line, Yesimcha Elohim ke Ephraim v'chim Nashe, is what we say to our boys traditionally every Friday night at the Shabbat dinner table. And to our daughters, we say, Yesimech Elohim ke Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, as Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. And then we recite the priestly blessing that's from the book of Numbers, right? The threefold blessing, Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. So this idea is that Israel will always bless their children, saying Yesimcha Elohim ke Ephraim v'chim Nashe, comes from right here in verse 20 in this chapter. So we have the Shema when we go to sleep, the Malach HaGoel Oti, incorporated into that blessing for all time, and this blessing of Ephraim and Menashe as for all time as well when we bless our children at the Friday night Shabbat dinner table. So we will stop here for today. So the beauty of these blessings then is not just of this family blessing, but how the family blessing becomes a perpetual Jewish blessing for all time. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. We will meet again next Wednesday, right? Yes, we meet.
Joan, I have
Yes, Rita. Yes, Rita.
You had the wrong plural for Dalet. Dalet, it's not Daltot, it's Dlatot.
Delatot.
I thought, didn't I say Delatot?
No, you said Daltot.
Oh.
Okay,
Let me
sorry.
correct
No.
Rita.
So there's a distinction, Rita.
Yeah. All right.
When we use a noun combined with another word, like the conjunctive form, then yes, by itself, delet, the plural is delatot. But when it's the doors of something, it would be daltot Yisrael, not dilatot Yisrael. So the plural changes a little bit when it's used in combined with another word.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so yeah, by itself, delet, delatot, but daltot Yisrael is the doors of Israel. Okay, so it's a grammatical thing there.
The construct state.
All right, so all right, so yes, smichut, that's what it's called. Yes, all right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
You too.
Take care.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.